Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to have this session with my partner in crime, Adhiraj Singh, who has been the digital artisan for our collection. Before we begin, I'd like to just add that this is the first time we're actually seeing one another.
Yeah,
Otherwise, we've always been, because we don't
everything's
really
been
use
on.
audio. Phone or even if it's
Yeah.
on Zoom calls or whatever, it's always audio. So really nice to finally meet you and see you. And why don't you introduce yourself to the audiences, and then I'll go ahead.
Sure. I'm Adhiraj Singh. I'm an art director, digital designer, and 3D artist based out of New Delhi. I also am a co-founder of Lota India, which is a sustainable startup that makes clothes from 100% waste textile. And we communicated using 3D models and digital sets and a lot of experimental new age mediums. And that's how we actually met, right? Like you featured Lota on Future Collective, and that's how this partnership actually began. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I was curating a few brands a few months ago, and I came across this amazing profile with all virtual communication. And when this opportunity came to come on to showcase our collection at Helsinki Fashion Week, I think it's been very interesting to have you on board. Where I come from, this traditional sort of space of handmade artisanal jewelry created out of brass, and he brought in this sense of this whole new digital world for us where now everything was on Google Drive was my workshop. And of course Adhiraj played a really important role, and I'd love to hear a little bit in terms of, especially our teardrop eyewear piece, the one that we worked on initially. If you could just take us through in terms of how was it working on jewelry as compared to apparel, since that's the background, plus being a 3D designer.
Absolutely. So my background was in creating kind of more digital sets and models and influences and just playing with the visual communication aspect of it. But I think when you came in and you told me about the project, it became super interesting to me because it was about taking your sketches, like you could hand draw a sketch and give it to me. And I've been working with these techniques to kind of digitize these things, but I haven't kind of done it for a specific purpose like jewelry. I've made some visual communication um, work for other brands, but to actually create the workflow completely digital and digitize your things in real time, fitting into objects, has been quite an eye-opening experience. Both in terms of creating what's based, kind of made physically by you, but also I think on your end, kind of seeing the possibilities of once you digitize something, what you can actually do with it in 3D space and the kind of creative opportunities that are given to you, right? Um, so that was really eye-opening to me, and throughout the whole process, and even our collab piece, working within this kind of potential of digi fashion and whatever's coming up, and yeah, it's been really good.
Can I ask you something? How much time did that teardrop eyewear piece make?
Right. So we had an intern. Shout out to Virti for helping out. It's actually there are a few techniques. Like within 3D, you can do things in many different ways. It didn't take a lot of time because it was really clean, simple, minimal aesthetic. Um, it was more about the details, getting the details right. Like once you create it as a 2D or a 3D shape, to kind of morph it around the body and get that almost perfection around the contours of the face and fitting it to the models was where the challenge actually came about. And of course, like texturing it and reflecting the kind of goal that you have in your collections, like essentially getting the eye for the details right rather than kind of just making the shapes, because making modeling and those techniques are relatively easier to do within the kind of requirements that you had. But to answer your question more directly, about a day to kind of work on making the base shape, but about another day, a day or 2 days to kind of actually morph it onto a model and get it looking right, sending it to you, getting approvals. Um, and even working with bigger teams was interesting because in the beginning we didn't have a texture for the eyes, so like a lot of your eyepieces kind of lined up specifically with the eye. So kind of even these small problem solving things that I think as 3D designers, it's all about problem solving. You have like 100 different problems that keep coming up, but you're just so stubborn to actually like solve those problems. um, so yeah, definitely it's where the details which take more time than actually just modeling the pieces themselves.
Yeah. because that was a particularly fun piece, and I think we have a video as well that we can show, and maybe you can take them through
Yeah.
little details of how do you connect it, say from the year,
Yeah.
or what are the new details that one has to be mindful of.
Sure. I mean, it starts with your sketch coming through. What's interesting about our workflow is that we're the only designers or collective that is doing jewelry comparative to everybody else. However, there are a lot of workflow similarities. Like, for example, the clothing patterns were made in Illustrator and then sent to people that were making Marvelous Designer or Clo. But for us, you sent it as PDFs or Illustrator files, which are similar workflows, but kind of like different. And yeah, just bringing those in and putting them together was definitely not that challenging, but yeah.
Because I also felt that, I mean, I think we discussed a lot on concept because each piece has its own story. So I think there was a lot of time that we spent on kind of actually creating the format of working together, what each piece would mean, what kind of gold texturing it would have, for example, because it's this minor detail. And I'd just like to add here that especially when it comes to digital, I know initially everywhere I heard it's limitless, 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 and of course it's limitless. But then again, when I started working on it, coming from like my main focus is hair accessories, for example, right? And hair is a real problem in the 3D world. Hair is a really big problem in the 3D world, isn't it? With all this.
Hair is a very tricky problem, yes. I mean,
Yeah.
you can make something that looks good, but to get it functional animation, especially within workflows, it's tricky, it's challenging, but doable. But coming back to the teardrop kind of motif that we were working with, like the idea of like creating splines, like how do you feel actually after seeing the workflow, seeing your work being digitized, as a creator, as somebody that's always created within physical restrictions, like how has that opened up possibilities for you to kind of explore your creativity besides the technical? I totally agree, like there is infinite potential within 3D, but it does take time, right? It's not like a press of a button where you just magically just open the software and it happens, which a lot of people weirdly they have that idea that it just pops out of nowhere, right? And that's why we kind of want to focus on the process to kind of show people the possibilities. And I think that when you started coming into that world, you started thinking a bit differently, right, about creating works in the future. Could you talk a bit on that?
Sure. I mean, my entire work process completely changed from where earlier I was going to a workshop and sitting with my artisans, playing around with metal, getting one sample made, and then we would wait 2 days and then make the other one because you don't magically get so many different versions. Everything is handmade and it's all made by really highly skilled artisans, but it's still time consuming, but looks absolutely beautiful. So the difference what I felt with digital was that the fact that now I could experiment and have 3, 4 different iterations and I could see them come to life. Before I had to waste metal on it. I think that was a big takeaway from me. Also, what I noticed to use it in a way as a virtual fitting tool. Now that we are making, as you know, with Virati, and we've created a team in house now that makes the renders and the models.
Right.
I think what's helped us is that in the smaller pieces, the way we fit them on the way I want them to look on a model, say. Now I can take those fitting judgments from before. Of course, once it's made, you'll change the hook. But now I know with the weight and the size, density. So it's been an interesting journey to kind of see something that is lifelike, but it's not real, but it'll make my offline process more efficient.
Interesting.
My focus was to understand how can I now involve these digital tools that will make my offline model more efficient, not essentially to take over, but for them to kind of work in harmony in some way, where we start using these smaller tools and start fitting them on an everyday basis. So any new design that comes up, now I don't have to, if it doesn't need to be sampled in real life, then it won't need to. We're not going to waste, and we won't even have to give them recycle that metal, for example. So I think that's an interesting takeaway. But I'd also love to hear about the collaboration piece. I know that's something that both of us have spent a lot of time on.
Yes.
And I'm sure you can see there are lots of these chrome images, explorations that Adhiraj has created. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it kind of started by looking at your pieces. I was familiar with your work, but as I kind of started digitizing your pieces, and it became a bit intimate, right? Like I said, it's almost pixel, like moving pixels, getting things right, and there was a certain amount of. I felt it was way more delicate than the kind of work that I normally do. Um, so kind of when we came about the collab piece, we were talking a lot, and we actually started talking about 4 months ago, like just when the pandemic started hitting, and there was this. I mean, we all remember where we were, right, or when everything started going down. So there was this kind of like doomsday equation, and we were talking about sustainability within our own workflows. There's this inherent juxtaposition between the world around us versus like these ideals we were standing for, right? So we kind of wanted to reflect that in the collab piece. The idea of essentially that you're kind of going about your normal routine and suddenly something really bold or aggressive or something that you don't think is going to come just suddenly comes and takes over, consumes your whole life, and not your whole life, like the whole world's kind of everyday existence. And we kind of wanted to reflect that in the piece, and so much so that we wanted the piece to destroy the person as they were walking down the runway. Remember, we talked about that because it's all about that idea of shock and kind of like you could go about your everyday life and then suddenly things could just collapse on itself, which was kind of what we were trying to go for within these explorations and iterations. And like conceptually, that's what we wanted, but at the same time, visually, we wanted some weight, right, to kind of offset the delicate nature of your pieces. So I guess you could probably see that in the explorations, which we went back and forth, and it was really interesting to see your input as well, and kind of like how you would approach 3D and your insights towards that. Yeah, it really helped draw the piece to where it is today.
Yeah, it definitely changed the way I design in some ways. Working with you, especially considering we were co-designing something, what made me realize is that normally when I'm creating something for an offline or create something that's tangible, what happens is that be mindful of the fact that eventually a human being is going to wear it, a guy or a girl. So I have to make sure in terms of how heavy it is, how will it fit on the face, will that person be able to breathe or not breathe if it's a facial brass is extremely heavy. But in this case, because this was a completely conceptual piece that we've decided not to make it into a tangible product as such, we've decided to pitch it as a purely conceptual idea that can, of course, be used, say, for even things like filters to virtual fashion e-tailers to, say, even the virtual gaming community. So I think the aspect of looking at it sense was very different, and that opened my eyes up to the surreal world of, yes, I can make something that can be absolutely bizarre and actually explain the concept of chaos and destruction. It's about what goes on in our minds that have to be reflected, that gets reflected outwards as well. So I think it was a really nice piece to kind of put in both our sort of minds and our hearts together into it.
Yeah,
I think
definitely.
we have a video as well of one of the iterations that's I think about to show. But it's been so exciting. I mean, we've worked on what, 8 pieces together all the way, and 8 completely different pieces. I'd also like to mention about one of these other pieces. We don't want to give everything away, guys, because the show is just in a few days, and we'd love for you to watch it. But even small things like where we needed flowers, there's a bank where you can go pick flowers from. Correct? That's what you
Yeah,
do, right?
absolutely. I mean, there's so many banks, like there's so many assets in the 3D world. But yeah, definitely, you could create it from scratch. You could take a photo from your garden, create whatever you want it to be, really.
But that's even though we were creating everything by hand, but I remember you shared all these resources with me for me to at least be informed about what am I stepping into? How are these digital avatars created? I got a lot of, we did a lot of learning on how these even models are created, because I personally had no idea how real human beings are scanned and then converted to these digital avatars. And in fact, to take it a step further, Adhiraj has actually created India's first
Yeah,
CGI model. That's Rajiv. And I think he's going to tell
Rajiv.
us a little bit about it right now.
Yeah, so Rajiv was started way back in 2018, and we kind of needed a new vehicle to tell the story of Lota, because we make these shirts. These are made from 100% waste textile, but we didn't want to go the traditional route of kind of photographing and doing that. And that's where these techniques of creating models and sets and spaces just really intrigued me. And we created Rajiv, we put him out there, and we got a really good response, which kind of just completely pushed us into just running with the idea of like what can you do with like a model that's part of a fashion brand, and how do you tell stories through that. But we're also very data centric. We saw the data coming into Instagram, we saw bounce rates on our websites, and just by knowing the numbers in the fashion industry, what's interesting about 3D and this whole new wave is that there's a lot of engagement. Like whether you hate it or love it, people still are interested with what you can do, right? Because you have that infinite potential. But again, that takes time. So created Rajiv. He's a very normal-looking model, almost like an everyday person. And I think this is something that we really mindfully try to think about, because if you look at a model that's kind of a traditional model, you can't really change any of the characteristics of that model, right? Whereas in 3D, you actually have complete control to change the skin color. You can change the body and face type, ethnicity, body shape, right? So suddenly you have these abilities to curate actually what you want to communicate. So you can tell a lot about a brand or kind of a model that's created by somebody by the variables that they leave on to their models, right? Whether they have makeup on them, whether they look attractive. So we really wanted to play with those variables to kind of construct Rajiv, who's like a very normal, kind of approachable person. Um, but then we also have Priya, who is another virtual model that's a complete opposite of Rajiv. She's provocative, more kind of has a whole being part of the deep web as a visual bot that kind of escaped and lives on TikTok. But then TikTok got banned in India, so I had to kind of abort that project. But we moved on. Family, yeah, which we're using all three of them in the show, which is
I love the fact
super
that
exciting actually.
yeah, so we have all three of them as a part of the show, and I'm super excited that we actually have Indian CGI models representing on an international platform. But I want to go back to that point. One can change anything about these models. I think that can be really dangerous as well, because I feel like as brands we need to make sure what message we're putting out there and not support the unrealistic ideals of beauty. I think that's extremely important, that it's the anything that's created has to be aspirational, but also at the same time has to be real. It can't be unrealistic, and it does not. I also should not be anything to do with cultural appropriation. I think that's very important as well. So kind of embracing every culture and embracing all types of bodies and faces, and absolutely anything. I think having diversity is extremely important, especially for our brand, but also for you, Adhiraj, right? I think that's why you created the models that look very lifelike, and they look like normal. They don't necessarily have any zero size
Yeah,
figures or any.
definitely. Like, yes.
Yeah, that's something that I think
So
is
we,
important to put forward, because I mean, if you look at what's happening in the world in terms of age compression as a socio-cultural trend, where there are older people who want to look younger and younger people that want to look older. So I think it's important for brands to really make it real, and being conscious is about also talking about what you're representing, which sort of models we're choosing as well, right? Sorry, you were saying.
absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. Like, it gives you a lot of responsibility, actually. All the ability to choose all these variables. And yeah, we're learning more and more as this, because even with other kind of CGI models, there is certain level of controversy with some of the other ones. Like the news articles that come out, and it's definitely a learning experience. Like I try to learn a lot things that, like you said, appropriation, but it doesn't only have to be cultural appropriation. It could also be taking away like giving voice, right? This idea of giving voice to people. And digital models can be used as a metaphor to do that, but at the same time, you have to also try not to do that. You can't just completely replace what exists right now, which is people, which is tangibility, and all these factors. I think they need to work in tandem as opposed to just overriding this whole industry. Like, I don't think the future should be, the way I see it being is that like digi fashion kind of has this these tools or offerings to the current fashion landscape, right? Whether it's your jewelry designer, clothing designer, and you may not have any 3D in your final communication, but you could use the tools and techniques to kind of, like you said, iterate better solutions, be less wasteful. And yeah, it's very encouraging. And if I think that's what this fashion show is. It's been really interesting to hear the talks and listen to other designers talk about it. It's fascinating to see this common thread of a lot of traditional designers talking to 3D designers and just being like, I could change the color just by pressing a button. I can change buttons. I can iterate through different designs, and just the excitement that traditional designers have to these tools. I think there's definitely like an interesting dialogue going forward, and I'm sure we will work together as well to create some really fun stuff in the future,
Sure,
right?
100%.
Because all the teething issues have finished by now, and I think like we've understood our workflows.
Yeah,
Um,
that's yeah. I mean, of course, because I think now that you are considering you already have an offline traditional brand and you are a digital artist, I think was a great benefit to me because you really kind of gave me that time and understood my and to sort of put in that work and knowing that I don't come from a technical standpoint at all. So I have to admit that by working in a 3D space, I'm going to be continuing this, at least a few aspects, like you said, like SolidWorks definitely is now my new favorite. Something I actually didn't even know about. I know for most
right.
university students, they all, I mean, I finished university in 2008. So I've never been a
So we
big
went to the
fan
same
of that many
university, right?
softwares and
Yeah.
technical details. And now I was thrown into this life and it's been really interesting. I definitely want to use it, but I want to use it mindfully and be conscious about
Mindfully.
how
Yeah.
digital tools are going to be a part of my brand or while we're working together now or in the future. Well, thank you so much, Adhiraj. Do we have any thing else that we might want to discuss?
Um,
I think we're
I,
good.
I think we've talked. I think we could go on and on, but we should
We-
probably.
yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
we should. We should. Sounds good. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening in and for watching. And thank you to the HFW team for putting this together. And I'll speak to you soon, Adhiraj.
yeah, you too, Roma. Thanks, everyone. And again, thanks, Helsinki, on board and super excited for the show, right?
Yes.
Like, I can't wait to see like how it's going to turn out.
Me too. Me too. Guys, it's 29th of July at 8:45 p.m. We'll see you there. Please register on the Helsinki Fashion Week Live website.
Yes, yes.
Super. Okay, you take care,
Okay.
Adi. Right.
Bye, guys.